I'm way too far down there.
So we've been working on Zorn now, and the Zorn work I kind of want to do is work a little bit on showing what the rest of the core road is going to be like. Kind of opening up kind of where we're going with all this. So it's not really revolutionary and new for some people. Some people it is. So I think it will be useful. The goal I think here is to show what we can do with Zorn work, and show how it opens up the rest of the Liechtenauer system. Why he starts with Zorn out, or why he starts with that, the binding work from it, and what you can do with it. So let's do is go ahead and we're going to start with just 1 or 2 rounds of Zorn work. We've been doing forever and ever, kind of warm up. So basically just the plain old, somebody attacks, you do your Zorn out, followed by blind responses. We'll do 1 or 2 of those, and then we'll build one. Alright, so that's where we start, right? We've done that since fundamentals. We've kind of fine-tuned it a little bit. So Liechtenauer starts with he who strikes from on high, the point of wrath threatens. So anyone who comes down from above, you're going to use that wrath point to threaten. And then when he's aware, come off from above onto the other side. So that's the whole play right there. So you threaten with the point on the weak. If he's aware of it, pushes it aside. You're going to come off from above.
So are we still playing around with kind of just popping up as opposed to cutting around fully?
2 different interpretations.
Okay.
Yeah. But we could, keep playing with both. Both are useful in different ways. So the next section we get into with Liechtenauer, he says, be strong against the turn. He sees the thrust go low. So what you're going to do is, if you are, so as an attacker, if I'm attacking you, I'm basically, my goal, if I'm doing a good cut, like we've done when we do test cutting and other things, we get used to the dynamic of a good cut. My cut needs to cut through to some degree, right? I'm not just going to pop in here. I'm cutting through you, and I'm intending to do you harm by getting through that target like you would. So if that's my intent, that's what's going to typically happen. But sometimes what happens is, I start to cut and I realize, oh crap, he's going to defend that. That's not going to work. And what you do is it stops here. Right. And it's not just a shoot to long point. It's you're popping out the long point and then they squeeze hard against that cut because they see your counter cut coming. And it's intuitive sometimes. So they abort that complete cut through and they stop and hold strong against your blade. Right. This is very common. It happens a lot. We were doing it in practice. But you started to do it. This is why I was saying you started to stop here and hold against that cut. It's very intuitive and natural for you to do in any kind of situation for many reasons. So when this happens, which is going to happen, basically they're cutting right into a strong bind. You're going to be strong against it, which means doesn't mean this. Doesn't mean like you cut here and hold like this, right? But what it does mean is I'm not going to let you win that center. So he cuts, I counter cut. At some point when we're making that contact, I'm going to just make sure that we hold that center together. That split second. It's literally like a split second. Right? If I go weak against it, he's going to pop me in that center. So we both cut. He starts with the cut, and I start to defend. He goes strong against it. I'm going to be strong against him. And then turn and winden, winding. So when he's giving me that strong bind, I'm going to wind against that. So when we did the weak bind, when I won that bind, and he was cutting all the way through, all I have to do is thrust straight in, right? Or, in some cases, it gives me a little bit more, I can wind toward him, thrust. If, on the other hand, he is giving me a hard bind, I'm going to wind away. So that's what he means by be strong against the turn. So when he is strong against my blade, I'm going to hold strong for a moment, and I'm going to wind to that outside for that.
So you're essentially doing what fabrics would call a yield, right?
Possibly. A while since I've...
You come into bind, they fight for it, and you just pop over.
Yeah. There is that which we often do. I don't know. Seems to be like a greater thing. Here it's very similar. We do it with 2 hands. We need that outside. That behind.
It's hard to do in gloves and jacket.
It is hard. Yeah. That's why I often let go. With 1 hand. Absolutely. Just go through this. With the jacket.
So it's not necessarily bad form to go into half sword there.
It's not necessarily, it's not orthodox.
Okay.
But sometimes I do it to compensate for the fact that I got all this. Try not to if we can do it. So that when we're doing this, it's got to be from a hard bind, right? So give me that little bit of hard press against it. The real key to this is this wind, everybody overwinds it. Let me get this on tape, don't mind. I think this is important for just draw it a little closer. So yeah, if I can get actually Andrew's a little handed. So this is what's important with this. Everybody overwinds this and they shoot over the wrist, right? It really is, my sword is already in position to do that outside wind. It's this. So I don't really need to turn too much with that hand. So what really is ending up happening is my right hand, my dominant hand should not be involved in that wind, as usual, right? It really should be my pommel hand, and it's this. I'm just lifting that hand. So it kind of ends up
It's
being
important to catch the tip on your cross to prevent them from.
I think it is. Yeah, so it's here.
Okay.
So it really is, it's my hand going from here to there. And notice my long edge stays down, my short edge stays up. Ish. Now you can actually turn a little bit. You can wind a little bit. You can do that 45 degrees, but you don't need to necessarily.
I mean, I'm rotating way over there because I thought where we were going.
No, for this, in this case, with here, it really is your pommel hand, well, your non-dominant hand, straight up. Your dominant hand is all long for the ride. It's loose. You're turning through that dominant hand. This is the real key to this. This one's tricky for this reason. That dominant hand needs to have a straight, strong wrist at the end of that. So it needs to be here at the end of this. Yeah, like that. You don't want to get to the hooky wrist. Hook wrist doesn't work. It needs to actually do that, because honestly, you're not doing any turning with this. You really have to do all that motion with this hand here. To there.
You're not necessarily going into a thumb guard, but you kind of are.
It is. It's a thumb grip, but yeah, it's not as deep or as much turn as there is. Yeah, that's it right there.
So basically, the sword's not turning.
Yep. Pops it up. So in the bind, what it does is it keeps that. You can shoot real quick. Straight in through there. So instead of me doing, a lot of people do this. Make it away on the outside and get it. It really is just a very quick wind here and pop it.
Well, it also seems like if you overwind, then you're putting yourself at risk for an afterblow.
Yes. Yeah, because that sword will come off. So that's one of the problems of moving to the outside, is that your actual sword is still on the inside. So you have to deal with that. So that cross is one way you deal with that, pitching on that cross. The other is that thrust. As I finish that thrust, I really should be inside of that range. It's very tempting to poke it from out here and withdraw, but it really needs to be deep in the area.
You just kind of have to
Which
go
is
forward.
honestly sometimes I cheat it's all through. Because my blade is being stopped by my body.
Right.
So I don't have the full momentum that I want. And that keeps you inside. Now, it's easy for you, at some point you could disengage, right? And just like touch me with that blade. But in ideal, I think in a tournament setting, that's probably going to happen sometime. But in a more realistic circumstance, you've got a sword through your chest, and you just laid the blade on it. That's about it. Right. If you use that. Try a few of
Looks
those.
like the thing to do would be to, when you start to wind, just disengage or here.
And that's what you see in Messer. What you see in Messer, actually, just a disengage. It's not even much of a disengagement. It's a placement on the wrist as that outside wind starts.
You should pull off his sword just enough,
Yeah.
and then cut back down. Right, would be a hard cut, but thrust.
All right, so what we have now is essentially the beginning of the 24 lines that you can do. So Liechtenauer says there are 24 different ways to wind and move something. Instead of learning all 24, he basically is slowly teaching concepts, and then you apply those concepts, and then you're able to do all 24 lines. Have you done this before?
No.
Let me,
It's been a while.
yeah, you might have heard it before. So, what we basically have done, Liechtenauer has done, really, rather than having to explain it, he goes into these drills that we just did, these pieces, And then from those, you're learning the first 2 lines. So basically, from this bind, if you're weak, go here towards your blade. If you're strong, here, away from you.
Okay.
So basically, you're testing 2 things: weak or strong. And he says test only 2 things. And my bind is on this side, right? Now, if my bind is on this side, the same principle applies.
Is this reverse?
Yep, just reverse. So if you were weak, I ride towards the blade. If you're strong, go against the blade. That's screwed up. Same thing. So now you have same concept applied on both sides. And so you have.
Now, does he count those as 4 winds?
4, yes. There's
Okay.
4. So you have those from the lower hanging and from the upper hanging. So you can do those in the lower hanging and upper hanging. That gives you 8, right? So, but in every single one of these 8, we're still doing thrusts, right? We're still winding thrust, winding thrust. So Liechtenauer also says you have 3 wounders, right?
Right.
So cut,
Cut, slice,
thrust,
and
hew, thrust, and slice. So you learn these with the slide, with the thrust. Thrust and thrust. If, on the other hand, you are cutting, it's the exact same thing. You're doing the exact same motion, it's still that winding motion, but you're turning it into a cut. So if we're here and you're weak, if you're weak, I'm going to still do my wind towards you to cut. If you're strong, I wind away to cut. And the same thing works. I'm still doing that same wind. If I even,
Is that second one you did, is that a duplier?
yes.
Okay.
So what you start to see is now the definition of nuclear come into play, really. It's that cut from that bind.
So it's an attack to the 4 openings, either high or low, with a thrust, slice, or cut.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's how you get your 24.
And your slice is just the same thing, but even closer. So if I'm here, got my slice, I'm here, got my slice. All those are the exact same motion. It's just this or this. And it can be strong or weak.
And what I choose to do has to do with how far away we are.
And so that's it. So this is where all the purists start to criticize Liechtenauer for not having a sense of distance. But I think, oh man, I hear it all the time. But I think that this is where you really get is a really subtle sense of distance, in that you don't have to worry about, okay, am I at largo or stretto? If you're at, okay, all I'm doing is I'm working that same concept, testing strong and weak, and I'm doing my winds the way I would, and my wounder is going to happen whether I am at the distance I should be at. If I'm too close, I'm going to do the exact same thing. You just train that response, it turns into a shindig. If I'm far enough away, you do the exact same thing, you can use it as a thrust. Anywhere in between, you can use it as a cut. And so you have this ability to do all those. So you got those 8 by 3 wounders, gives you 24 different ways of wounding somebody. And that's it. So in theory, that is all of Liechtenauer.
So in theory, my initial move, I can go for a cut, and if I come up short, then I just thrust.
Exactly. So then that's exactly it. Is you end up having those chainings of things together because you're able to do wind and wind, and you can chain one wooder to another based on that distance.